Today's video is going to take a bit of a different perspective in the terms of small games, by going to the larger side of small games with Super Dungeon Maker. I have a feeling this could be one of the bigger up and coming indie games available soon. Also, it's made by, shock horror, a studio of several people. But I think a part of the celebration of smaller games can involve the slightly larger smaller games. So, I don't know if you remember the release of the 2 Mario Makers, but during this time, something I heard about frequently was, what about Zelda? What if we could take these excellent tools developed here, make the browsing experience better, and make them useful for a 2D Zelda game instead? Well, Super Dungeon Maker heard this and thought, yes, that indeed sounds good. We then end up with 2 components of the game, the creation tools, and then the actual playing of these user-created dungeons. I think I will start with the creation tools. It's the aspect I actually played around with least, but they seem to basically do everything you would expect. You can place footpaths, walls, traps, enemies, chests with items in, and even the duplicitous empty chest. Just to really play around with that seasoned Zelda player's brain. The game asks you early on to mess around with these tools in a created space that's designed to get you used to them. It's basically a small dungeon that has various impasses that you can't get through, and these little helpful creatures explain what you need to do. You know, you need a door to get through this room, so go create a door and then walk into the next area sort of thing. Here's some enemies for you, but if you really want to get rid of them, just go into the creator and get rid of them. Now, this doesn't actually apply to the main game, but it gets you used to these tools, gets you used to moving things, putting them in different places and seeing how they interact. At first glance, the tools do seem a little basic, but have most of the things you would want from a 2D Zelda. Pushable blocks, red-blue switches, and even areas that are designed for the player to drop down to another level. But the few user-created dungeons I played seem to completely refute this simplicity. As with Mario Maker, the game becomes quickly about pushing the boundaries of the tools provided, coming up with ingenious combinations that provoke a different logic outside of the traditionally developed experience. Things like bosses becoming about a series of dodges where you have to bomb these walls to get through to the other end and you can't actually damage the boss. You can quickly see how these tools can be used to create fiendish delights to delve into, showing no restraint, no regard for the player. Mario Maker over the years seemed to develop a meta, but these deceptively simple tools being used to create different levels that fell in and out of vogue, almost spawning their own genre types and games types out of it. Now, I cannot say if this game is going to accommodate this completely, but you start to get the whiff of this being possible. Now, the actual items available to the player are just kind of the ones from Zelda, or the 2D Zeldas at least, so you tend not to find too many unique interactions that this game is producing, instead going for the faithful recreation. But in this faithful recreation, you get the ability to endlessly remix a classic in new creative and interesting ways that sure seem to be able to provide an extensive opportunity for freshness. This is also an area of the game that could easily be expanded if they chose to, bringing its own flavour to the tools and abilities that allow you to play within these spaces in different ways, each exponentially opening up further exciting routes for the dungeon makers themselves to work on, new ways of thinking about the spaces and enemies. Now, I do find that I can't help but wish for a bit of a metastructure within. Perhaps the brain has been broken by years of games having external incentives from the core gameplay loop, but I can only see how this would enhance the rest of it. Nothing quite like the needing to unlock aspects of the creation tools, as you get in Mario Maker, that seem to be pretty much universally hated, and I can see why. But if it was just like a cosmetic upgrade or something along those lines, I think that could work quite well. Maybe this is just an indictment of myself, but I think it's hanging around my brain because the game is about going into dungeons and diving into dungeons in a very roguelike tendency. And the modern roguelike type games have you coming up for air at the end, you've finished and completed the dungeon, and you get some sort of progression or reward, and I think that core loop actually works extremely well. I can also understand how people want to avoid it. After all, the game has everything it actually needs inside for it to work. This would just be the icing on the cake, really. This game is available for a demo right now on itch, but it will be getting a full paid release, including on the Switch. I might hazard a guess that they're doing this just to test the connectivity features and want a space to test these more fully, but even playing the demo, the game feels functioning well. It's the most complete small game that I've played because it's more in the actual developer indie space instead of the homemade hobbyist space. There's a couple of places where a bit of UI polish might go a long way, but that being said, I do not feel like this is hard to recommend at all. If you have any interest in 2D Zelda or Mario Maker, then this is a very interesting game to check out. My name has been Billy. Peace.